All right, guys, welcome back to the Sex and Bacon podcast. On today's episode, I have with me Rae Szereszewski. She's a sex educator, among many other things. So, Rae, thank you for being here, and I'll get you to quickly introduce yourself and give me a little bit of background.
Yeah, my name is Rae Szereszewski, as you just said. I'm a certified sex educator and sexuality coach, among other things. And I was certified over the pandemic through Options for Sexual Health, which is the largest Planned Parenthood affiliate in all of Canada. They're a great organization. And I also spent 10 years working in the what I call alternative lifestyle industry, where I was working part time at a sex club and I was running events there. And I was their event coordinator over the pandemic for all their virtual events as well. So I was spending years doing a lot of, I would call it like camp style education, where you teach through games. And I realized that this is what I was really passionate about. And I went and wanted to transition to being able to do more straight education. By straight, I mean like actual, like people sit down and I can give them a PowerPoint, not just trying to teach through fun.
Okay.
Um,
So
yeah.
being in that lifestyle, being around it, what would you say is the one thing that you noticed was missing the most when it comes to education or just what you were seeing and experiencing?
Yeah, I think inherent in being in those spaces is a lot of information around polyamory and non-monogamy and like sexual non-monogamy and kink and communication and all of those, consent. All of that's a really big part of the conversation, but no one ever wants to talk about STIs. They're not sexy. There's no sexy way to talk about STIs. Obviously, people are should be talking about STIs with each other if they're going to be having sex with someone, but no one wanted to talk, or rather, there wasn't really the space to talk about STIs in a way that was giving non stigmatizing healthy information. And it's honestly one of the main questions that I get from people is, well, what about STIs? From like people who are not in the lifestyle. A lot of
Mhm.
them are asking things like, oh, well, what about STIs? And I was meeting a lot of young men, just through the online platforms that I was involved in as part of my job, and also my job, who were all about let's fuck everything. And then we talk about herpes, and all of a sudden they're running away and don't want to be part of the community anymore because there's so much bad information out there about STIs. And so that's that question of, you have sort of some people who are very aware of STIs and very educated who are in the lifestyle. And then you have people who had really bad sex ed who just are, maybe for all intents and purposes, in their fuckboy stage, regardless of gender, who don't want to talk about it and are making interesting choices due to a lack of information.
Mhm. I agree with you on that. I've spent a lot of time in different um, lifestyle clubs. I've gone with lots of different friends who are not in the lifestyle. I'm not in the lifestyle, but I do love the atmosphere. I love the vibe. I love the energy. I love the friendliness of the people. But the one thing that I think is like we would go on like voyeurism and exhibitionist night. When you're upstairs watching 30 to 40 people intermingle, I'm not gonna lie, the first thing that goes through my mind is, "Wow, I'm so turned on. I can't wait to jump into this fuck fest." It's there's a lot of people not wearing condoms. Like, are these people clean? How do you know that they're clean? Did you just meet them? Like, that's gotta be a lot of trust going into that. So, as somebody not in the community, as an outsider thinking that, like, you might go there and that's something you might wanna partake in, I mean, I felt like that was all I could think about was
Yeah. I think even the language that you use is very telling as well, because in society, we're taught to ask if someone is clean or not. If you are STI free, you're clean. And if you have an STI, you're dirty.
yeah.
And that's sort of the implication. So even in that space, walking up to someone going, are you clean, could be a very offensive thing to do. So language that I recommend people use if they do want to know is just saying, are you STI free? Have you been tested? What were the results? Because there are some people who live with incurable STIs. For example, like HPV is something that lives in your body until it sometimes clears up on its own. And that's why a lot of people are getting vaccinated. 60% of adults in the world have herpes, and 80% of those adults don't know they have herpes. That's an
Mhm.
incurable virus that just lives in the body forever. But it's honestly, for the people who live with it, not that big of a deal. But if you were to go up to someone in a 40-person orgy and go, are you clean? And they're like, actually, I have herpes. Now there's that whole awkward moment of, oh, so I just implied that you're dirty or unfuckable or all of these other things that are with that, which is one of those other questions of, like, once again, there's just this lack of information around
Mhm.
STIs, and people some of the people don't even realize that when they're in those settings, they're interacting with some people who might have an STI. And I want to add, HPV and herpes are both skin to skin contact. So condoms will protect you to a certain extent, but not entirely.
Right.
So these are questions that people don't even know to ask, don't have answers to. And yeah, but anyway, I would also just recommend that if you are in the lifestyle and you do want to know someone's STI status, you can just say, hey, do you have any STIs? Do you get tested regularly? And like, if they say yes, ask, oh, what does that mean to you? Right? You want to make
Mhm.
sure that you're on the same page of what regularly means and what that means for you and your body. And all of that should be fine and normal. That
Right.
conversation should be a normal conversation to have in those settings. And for a lot of people, it is.
But I like what you said at the beginning, how because it's not a sexy conversation and people just assume automatically that sex has to be sexy and orgies have to be sexy and polyamory and swinging is this sexy thing. So if you bring up the uncool, unsexy thing, well, you're ruining the vibe.
Yeah, you know what ruins the vibe for me? The back of my mind constantly thinking questions and feeling bad that I didn't
Mhm.
ask them, or like
Yep.
walking into a space like that and like not knowing and not being sure, or like not knowing how to ask that question and like not wanting to participate because of it. Like that to me is unsexy versus being
Mhm.
able to just go in and confidently just say like, hey, I want to join, but can I ask quickly, what's your STI status? You know? And once again, experienced people in the lifestyle who have been in it for so long, they're not going to be turned off by that question. And if they are turned off by that question, that's telling you everything you need to know about if you want to play with them or not.
Mhm.
Because if you care about STIs and you care about your sexual health and you care about your own sexual health, like you want to be with someone where they're going to be just like open and honest and chill, right?
Mhm.
Can you trust that this person is getting tested and would tell you if they're being uncool about it? I don't know. I've also met certain people who are in their 60s who I'll talk about condoms or birth control or something and they're like, "Oh yeah, birth control. I only have sex with people who've been through menopause. I forgot about that." Like they don't think about condoms as protecting themselves from STIs because they also, I guess it's also sometimes a generational difference versus like I'll meet other people who were raised in the HIV/AIDS crisis who are incredibly strict about condom usage for those reasons. So it's just one of those like clusterfuck of like fears and anxieties and stigma, but like how do you be sex positive while also, dealing with all of that internalized and often like externalized stigma around something that's so integral to sex.
Yeah, and like and I agree with you. It is one of those things where I think like people just I think they just assume that you don't have it. If you're gonna play, you don't have anything, and I don't think that's the reality is in all honesty, I mean, 80% to 90% of the guys that I have talked to when I have brought up chlamydia, especially, they have always said, "Well, I don't have any symptoms." And it's
The
like
number one symptom of chlamydia and gonorrhea is no symptoms at all.
right? And so it's just very mind blowing that even men in their 30s or 40s still have that mentality that if I don't have any symptoms, I don't have anything and I'm clean. And that's not the reality. I went through during COVID. I haven't talked about this before, but I'll openly share it. During COVID, I went through two occurrences where I ended up getting chlamydia. And the first time was yes, I was having casual sex, but I was having casual sex with friends, men and women in group settings, but people I've known for years and years and years. And so then all of a sudden, when I got tested and I tell everybody, instantly everybody's, well, it's not from me and I'm clean. I have no symptoms. And I'm
It's
like,
like, well, did
right.
you get tested? Yeah.
Yeah. It's like,
Yeah.
well, somebody does. And the funny thing that I found and I told everybody because it's like, no, everybody needs to go get checked. But people don't want to get checked. That's the thing is like right away, they're like, I'll just take the pills. And it's like, why not just find out if you have it so that we can find out maybe where it came from? So the right like train or the right line of people are being informed about this. But people they don't want to because then they don't want to admit that they had it because then they think that they're dirty. And
And
it's
that's
that's,
exactly the stigma. That's
yeah.
exactly the stigma there. So one of the reasons that people don't get tested is because not knowing is better than knowing and then having to deal with, what does that mean about me? What does that mean about my actions? What does that mean about what I've
Mm-hmm.
done? And so what I try to do when I teach about STIs is take that out of it. Like, point out that yes, this is it, but let's give you actual information of what you need
Right.
to do. And when I say get tested regularly, if someone were to say, well, what's regularly? My answer to that is that's a conversation between you and your doctor.
Mm-hmm.
Monogamously married couples are frequently recommended by their doctor to get tested once a year.
Mm-hmm.
That's a recommendation from a doctor. And if you are in a marriage where you also like to participate in orgies, your doctor might say, okay, well, you're going to get tested 2 to 3 weeks after every orgy. You know, if
Yeah.
you're having orgies every single day, which I haven't met anyone doing that yet, but if you are, then your doctor might have other recommendations for you. But the other thing is that saying, I just want to take the antibiotics, like, you shouldn't take antibiotics if your body doesn't need it, because you can become resistant to antibiotics. So getting tested is basically the first step, and getting tested regularly is what we're also in sex ed school told to teach people. Before, you were taught, look at this molecule, look at these genitals. This is what happens to these genitals when this bacteria gets there. Isn't that horrifying? You don't want to be
Mm-hmm.
like that. But now we're just taught, what we teach is, if you're an adult and you're having sex, you're probably going to come into contact with an STI. And that's just normal. That's what happens when you have adults who are having multiple partners throughout their life or through a
Mm-hmm.
day, doesn't matter. And so if that's the case, you want to have a conversation with your doctor about how regularly you should be getting tested. And so that way you can seek treatment when relevant. You go to the doctor when something's wrong with your stomach, things like that, you
Mm-hmm.
know, or in this case, you might not have symptoms. And because you might not have symptoms, but you're still spreading something, if we care about our bodies and we care about our friends, we don't want to be leaving something that's harmful in our bodies. Just because you have chlamydia and no symptoms doesn't mean it won't long-term cause health complications. So
Mm-hmm.
you want to make sure to be catching something early. Another example that a lot of people are scared of is like syphilis and venereal disease. Venereal disease used to just mean STI. And I think my husband actually was the one who was like, what about venereal disease? Whatever happened to that? I'm like, do you mean like syphilis? Because that's cured with penicillin. He's like, are you serious? Penicillin? I'm like, yeah, that's why we never hear about syphilis anymore. Because it was, you get rid of it with penicillin. Nobody's taught that. You're just taught that syphilis makes you crazy if you leave it unchecked for too long.
Oh, okay.
Right? Like, it's literally just like, if you catch it early, which you'll catch
Yeah.
through regular testing, it's like 2 shots to the butt and then it's gone for your life. Like, you never have it again. You might have to get retested. Things
Yeah.
like that. So there's all this information out there that, once again, I love talking about STIs because I think that it's one of the things we have a lot of fear about that we don't. So to circle back to what you said, people think that if they're in a sexual setting like this, they're probably not going to encounter an STI. You got to switch your thinking. If you know that 60% of the world's adult population has herpes and 80% of those adults don't know they have it, that means, one, it doesn't affect them. It doesn't affect their lives. That's why they don't know they have it. But
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't mean they're not sharing it with other people. It just means that they have it and don't know because it never affected their life. So go
Right.
into an orgy assuming that some of those adults have herpes, might not know about it, wouldn't know to tell you in the first place. Some of those adults might have HPV living in their bodies right now. It's a common thing. Sometimes your body fights it off. There's a few strains that are important for us to take care of. That's why we get
Mm-hmm.
vaccinated, because they're the ones that cause cervical cancer. But like, the point is, go into these settings assuming you might interact with an STI. And that's when you can use barrier methods to prevent that. You can use testing as a way to make sure you're treating anything if you are interacting with anything you didn't want to interact with.
Mm-hmm.
But when we see someone who has an STI, frequently, if we're not educated on this, all of a sudden, that's all we care about, right? We don't care that they're a good person. We don't care that they have been very good with barrier usage. We don't care that they might be really good at finger banging. We don't care that, like, you know what I mean? Like, we don't care
Mm-hmm.
about anything else. All of a sudden, they're the one who knew they had herpes and told us, oh my God, now I'm afraid. No, this is someone who is responsible, takes care of it, shares their status with you. And if you are uncomfortable now, maybe doing genital to genital contact, you can say, like, okay, listen, I don't know if I have herpes or not. I am not sure if I'm comfortable having this kind of contact with you, but like, do you want to make out? Do you want to like finger me? Like, is there something else we could do? Can we go down on each
Mm-hmm.
other using a condom or a dental dam? And like, and then if that person's like, well, condoms aren't sexy, well, that tells you everything you need to know about that person, like, so I like to use STIs as an opportunity to get to know people on a deeper level.
I could see that, and, like, I really do think I think boundaries is a huge thing that people don't realize that they're allowed to have boundaries when it comes to sex, when it comes to what they aren't comfortable with. All of a sudden, they start to feel like maybe they're being weird and like, "Oh, I guess I'm just being a baby, so, okay, sure, like, sure, we can still do it, that's fine." And you almost like sometimes I think people feel bullied, like peer pressured in a situation of like, I'm overthinking this, I'm being ridiculous, like, what's wrong? Why wouldn't we get together? And not even just in adults, but in young kids. Young
Yeah.
kids in sexual settings and situations, let's be honest, like the sex education you get at school is non-existent. It's basically stay away from it. Um, the safe sex
Yeah.
talks,
Where
like,
do you live? Do we live in the same city?
I don't know. I'm in
Where
Edmonton.
do Oh, yeah, I'm in Toronto. So, yes, I know that,
Mhm.
like, Alberta as a whole, I've been told is a lot like America when it comes to your sex ed in terms of, like, abstinence only
Mhm.
and, like, if you have sex, you will get pregnant and die, all of that.
Yeah. Yeah, do it
Yeah.
when you get married and to have a baby. It's not meant for pleasure, it's meant for, conception, all of that old school kind of thinking. So,
I Can I share a fun sex ed story?
absolutely.
I got asked by so I have a friend that was the president of his fraternity. I would say friend now. He used to be like a he was a teenager when I met him. He graduated high school. I was like his staff in the organization that I worked for, and we stayed
Mhm.
in contact. And then when he needed to have someone come in to do consent education, he's like, I know the perfect person. So he calls me in to do consent education for his fraternity chapter. And I started the entire thing by just saying, okay, we're going to start off with why do people have sex? Like why do we as people have sex? And it's like dead room of 30 guys, dead silent. They're all like sitting on couches in their frat house. I'm like using their TV as my presentation screen. I'm like sitting cross-legged on the floor. I'm like, why do we have sex? Silence. One of them just raises their hand and goes, to make babies. And I said, I mean, yeah, I don't have sex for that reason, but certainly that is a reason that people have sex. And then they all
Mhm.
burst out laughing and started answering, like, for pleasure, for this, for that, because they're so used to being in a sex space where the only answer is to make babies
Mhm.
that when they had an adult be like, that's not why I have sex. Is that why you're having sex? And all of a sudden, they're thinking of all the wonderful reasons that we actually have sex for: connection, communication, to feel seen, to feel intimate, to feel good, to
Mhm.
experience something new, to get kinky. Like there's all of these
Yeah.
different reasons.
I love that
Anyway,
because
sorry to interrupt.
no, but it's so true. It's like people think that the right answer has to be the proper answer. That the right answer can't be because I wanna get off, like, and they're embarrassed to admit that it's because they wanna get off. So they feel like they have to come up with this very adult-like response to appease what they were taught growing up, and yet, like, that's so far from the truth because in all reality, anybody under a certain age or people in open relationships or this and that, they're not having sex to make babies. That is usually the last reason people are having sex between certain ages and then after certain ages. So why is it the one thing that we focus on when we teach people about sex education? It shouldn't be for that reason and it shouldn't be about that alone. But people are scared to teach it in other ways because they feel like then they're condoning behaviors that, have been frowned upon for so long or that it's, I don't know, a gateway into BDSM and fetishes, right?
It's I think there's a few factors here, which is one, we don't like the idea of young people as having sexual agency, right?
Mhm.
Which, like, young people have sexual agency. That doesn't mean that a 40-year-old man can go fuck a 16-year-old. It means that a 16-year-old wants to fuck another 16-year-old
Yeah.
sometimes, right? But the point is that, like, we don't like to think of young people as having agency or being mature enough to make those choices for themselves. And historically, we said, okay, get married first because, you needed income, you needed legitimacy, there was like a lot of factors, but we're getting married later and later and later. Do we
Mhm.
honestly expect people to wait until they're 30 to have sex for the first time? We do not. No one over the age of even 22, no one over the age of 16 believes that, right? Like, we don't believe that anymore. But we don't know culturally how to have this conversation with young people in a way that says, I know this feels good and I know that you're going to do it. but I want you to
Mhm.
make responsible choices around it that are going to be responsible for your body and responsible for other people's bodies. We want to make sure you're thinking about pregnancy. We want to make sure you're thinking about STIs. We want to make sure you're thinking about comfort and consent, and that this person wants to be doing this with you, and about more than just your own getting off, and how do we pressure people into doing that. And I
Right.
also think that gender roles really play a huge part on that, right? Like boys have to want sex and should want sex. And if they don't, there's something wrong with them. And girls shouldn't want sex ever. And if they do, there's something wrong with them. All
Yeah.
of those stories are also feeding into that narrative. So I'm at least glad that the consent conversation seems to have gotten a bit better.
Yeah, it seems to be like a huge focus I've noticed as of like the last year over everything and anything, which I had a little bit of a conversation about this, I think a week or two ago with Dr. Casey and Carrie Saunders. And it was kind of one of those things around essentially like you can give consent, but you're also allowed to take it back. And
Hmm.
and I think that's something that I could understand people maybe feeling confusion on, especially at a young age. It's like, oh, well, I told him I like this, but then like when it was happening, I didn't like it anymore, but I didn't know what to say and I didn't want to speak up. And it's that part of like, well, if I said it was okay and then I say it's not okay, what does that make me look like? Or then who am I if I did that? And then, and it's like, I think at a young age, we worry that the guy's going to be mad at us. Like, if I say, no, I don't like this anymore, no, I don't want to do this anymore, like then they're going to be mad. And like, we have that pressure, like, it's our job to please them, let them finish and make sure they're still having a good time.
Yeah, well, when we learn about sex is only happening to make babies, then we learn that sex matters about the male orgasm and it's done when the male orgasms, and that's all sex is. And I want to add that, like, all of those stories about young women being in those uncomfortable positions are awful and they're everywhere. And the more I speak with young men, the more I hear examples of young men being forced into sexual situations they don't want either and not knowing how to say no. Because they're in these high sexual settings where they're being pressured to want sex all the time. And so everyone
Ah.
around them thinks they want sex all the time, including women. So I was hearing stories from like fraternity members about like, and other young men just about how, oh, they were drunk at a party and they said no. And she kept going because he had a physical response and things like that. And like,
Ah.
because you assume that he's there for that purpose. And
Right.
there's no conversation around it, right? People think that sex is like the movies. There's no talking. There's no talk. You can't ask about STIs. You can't go, how do you like it? You can't say, oh, that hurts. There's no conversation unless it's, oh, yeah, that feels so good, deeper. All I care about is your dick. Like
Mhm.
that's how we're portrayed. So people don't understand how to actually negotiate and have a conversation and like use their words leading up to, during, and after sex.
Yeah. Oh, it's so true. I mean, I'll even admit it. There's like at a young age, even for myself, there's countless situations that I think I've probably been in with guys that, it's like the guy will say, no, no, I have a girlfriend. And, like in your mind, you just think it's like they're playing hard to get. And you like, so you step up your game a little bit more. And,
Yeah.
like you just try to turn them on a little bit more. And like it is like one of those things where it's just like, oh, okay, like the more that I do, eventually he's going to cave. Right. But I mean, funny enough, it's confusing because at a young age, that initial no really should be like just like a finalized, I respect that. If I respect you, I respect that you said no, not challenge accepted, but that's
Right.
where sometimes we take it is like, oh, okay, so you said no to me. Okay, well, I'm gonna challenge.
I
I'm
think
I'm by the end of the night.
if we respected people's no the first time they said it, think of how many people would learn how to say yes in a very clear, unconfusing way.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Like I think back to myself as well, and there were many times I was like, no, 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 but I was like deep down, I was kind of like, but you kind of want to. And
Mhm.
so if I had said no and someone respected that, it means that when I wanted something, I would have had to have said like yes and felt confident in that yes. But you're so
Right.
used to people wearing down your boundaries. You're like, is it really no? Is it really? You know what I mean? If we just were like, okay,
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
Imagine how many people would learn to say yes with conviction.
Yeah, that's so true. I never even thought of that, right? It was like because a no is a no. It's not a maybe. It's not a
Hmm.
later. It's not a after two more drinks. It is just a clear no. And we would have to know in our minds that then when somebody asks us something, we have to clearly say yes, or that's the last opportunity shot, essentially, to dumb
Right.
it down.
And you can always go back if they're a friend, there's someone you know, there's someone you're flirting with, you always go back and be like, "Hey, you remember when you asked me then? I have changed my mind. It's a yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would like to try this now." Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
no, I like that. And I really think that is probably like the message that should be taught because we tell our kids at a young age, like when we're raising them, it's like my kid will ask me something and I say, well, what did I say the first time? No. And I'm like, okay, so why are you still asking me? Like we teach them for certain things that when I say no, it means no. And yet with sex, it's become such a blurred line of what yes, no, and maybe really mean.
Yeah. So when I do teach consent, I have a parent-child self-defense and consent course I've been teaching that like with
Hmm.
the martial arts dojo that I go to, which has been very cool. So I don't do the self-defense portion, I just do the consent, and I will literally put up boards and be like, I don't tell them what yes, no, and maybe sounds like. Everybody already knows. And when you write it out yourself, you're like, "Oh, I do know what this is." So I will say like we'll have charts that say, yes, what does it sound like? What does it look like? No, what does it sound like? What does it look like?
Hmm.
Maybe, what does it sound like? What does it look like? And then I have another one that I say, how do you ask? It's everyone's responsibility to ask. And I know the parents, when I do this with like parents with all young girls, they're like, you get this sense that they're like, well, we all know that our girls are going to be the ones getting assaulted. So why does it matter if they ask? And I'm like, because the point is consent is for everybody. It's not a gendered thing. It's not boys ask and girls respond. That's then feeding into the idea that men want sex and girls have to be the gatekeepers, right?
Right.
Girls should also be asking because you can model good behavior for your peers.
Okay, so I do want to like I want to ask because I mean you also do education around kink.
Yes, I educate around everything.
Okay.
Yes, I do kink education. I do polyamory education, slash like non-monogamy education.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to dive into the kink one, and I say that because I feel like aside from sex itself, just kink in general, we still have a little bit of those fears about admitting our fantasies, admitting our desires. What does kink look like? What does that mean? How do I ask for it? How do I know what I'm into? How do I look for things to be into? So, what is it that you educate on? Is it courses? Is it the steps around it? Let's dive into that.
Yeah. So I run a monthly virtual workshop with my like online partner Marissa, and she and I have a like 1 hour webinar, if you will, and we call it our introduction to kink. And we did a version of that at the Taboo show that I believe we met
Mhm.
at, where we actually were so lucky to be blessed with a beautiful male stripper to let us demonstrate on him as we were doing it, and it was a wonderful time. The virtual edition, unfortunately, he's not there for us to abuse and delight in. So with the kink one, the way that I look at kink is that it is hard to Google how to do something safely if you don't know what to Google. That's sort of my general sex ed mantra is like, how do you Google the right things, including safety, if you don't know the words to look up?
Mhm.
And some like porn is not an education tool. We all know that. That's like not even, that's a given at this point. So if you don't know what splashing is, how do you look up splashing? Splashing, by the way, is when you incorporate food. And there's like what I call like high key splashing, where you're like fully tarping off a room and like really getting dirty in food. And then there's like low key splashing, which is I drizzled honey on my partner and licked it off, right? It's any incorporating of food. Cake sitting videos that you would see on like OnlyFans and campsites. That's splashing. So you don't know what splashing is. How are you going to look that up? I want to watch man cover himself in chocolate and have sex. Like you're only going to get limited hits rather than splashing, how to do it.
Okay.
So when we do the kink education, it's like a very like that particular workshop is like an introduction where we're going to explain the difference between a sensation and the kinks around sensations and the kinks around power dynamics, the BDSM side of it, and where they intersect each other. And then we give people a lot of different examples so they can go home and Google it. And then when we do it like the longer version of the workshop, we give some key safety things to keep in mind as they go through so that people are like, oh, that one I'm interested in. Okay, I might not Google it right away, but at least now I know these are the three things I need to keep in mind. And we
Mhm.
leave lots of time for question and answer. Not that anyone ever asks us questions at the end of it, but that's part of it. And then I think I mentioned as well, I do coaching. So I
Okay.
work with a lot of like men in their late 20s and early 30s who are really struggling with dating. And a lot of them are either kinky or poly, but a lot of men, like a lot of the people find me because I'm the kink positive, sex positive person. So one of the questions I get from them is like, how do I bring up my kinks when I'm dating? And like, what do I do? And so there's a lot of just education around the social nuance. What kind of apps do you list it on versus not? And then how do you say it in a way that doesn't scare people off? When do you bring it up? How do we incorporate it? How do we have those conversations with people who might not be kinky themselves?
Yeah.
Um, And so that's the other part of the education that I do, is sort of that one-on-one work with an individual specifically around that. I've also worked with older men who are like, I have kinks. My wife doesn't know. How do I tell her? Because I'm tired of doing it alone. And I've like coached men on how to have better communication skills so they can bring it up with their wives in a way that will get their wife to actually listen to them and not brush it off. Not
Right.
necessarily do it with them and be enthusiastic, but at least listen to them and go from there.
Yeah, be willing to try, I guess, right? That
Yeah.
open-mindedness going into it to see, to have discovery, play, to see if it's something that, maybe you do like and you just didn't know that you liked.
Yeah. And then as an educator, I don't necessarily think I need to be the one to teach someone the ins and outs of everything. I can give people like step by step instructions if they need to. But if someone wants to try Shibari, I'm going to link them to a website that has free video tutorials. I'm going to link them to people who, if I know someone in their city who does classes, I'm going to send them and connect them through FetLife or however.
What is
You are.
Shibari?
Oh, Shibari is Japanese rope bondage. It's like the pretty rope tying that you see people do.
Okay,
So
compared to the
SHI.
other.
Right. So let's say you just like to want to be tied up. You just like bondage. You don't care what it is. You're fine with handcuffs, a bed sheet, whatever. If
Mhm.
you want to get into like the sensual, fancy knots that are like art as much as anything else, then you would, first of all, you need to know the word shibari. So so there's like a bunch of great resources out there. So I don't necessarily need to show someone everything they need to know. I can connect them with lots of different other
Right.
places where they can find that information in a safe way. Because there are safety concerns with tying someone up that when you watch 50 Shades of Grey, you'd never think about. Like if your limb is above your heart for too long, your fingers are going to go numb. You need to
Mhm.
make sure that whatever you have either has a quick release or you've got scissors nearby. You want to make sure that you're not tying it so tight that your fingers turn purple, right? Things like that.
Mhm.
And you also like you want to be like restricted, but you don't want anything that's going to tighten the more that you fight against it, because that's how you end up hurting someone and restricting blood flow too much. So these are all things that you want to know. Same with choking. There's like a safe way to choke and a not so safe way to choke. So when you're
Right.
getting kinky, you need to be aware of what you're doing and what you need to be aware of. And you need to be aware. You can't just be like, oh, I love aggressive sex. I like to push her face in the mat and fuck her hard up the ass. You know what I mean? Like
It's like, well,
that's
who
not
says she
kink.
likes that, right?
Yeah, consent first. That's
Yeah.
not kink, that's just being aggressive. That's just
Yeah.
having aggressive sex. People who are like kinky and into BDSM and safe about it understand what it is that they're doing, understand that they are responsible for the safety of themselves and the other person there.
Mhm.
And there's also that factor of emotional safety. We all know that guy who wants to have aggressive sex, but then doesn't call you the next day. Rather, someone who's doing something kinky where they understand that aftercare is a really key component of making sure that everyone actually had a good time. You want to make sure that as you come down from those hormones that you had from being in this like incredibly intense situation, that, this person is still feeling emotionally okay. And our emotional safety is just as important as our physical safety when it comes to sex.
I love that you said. I've heard that term thrown out a few times, aftercare. I have one guy friend who I've heard him say that a few times, and it's very specifically like for after a hookup. He's like, I like to cuddle, like I like to create that bond. He's like, it's the aftercare that makes them feel special. And I'm just like, really? I was like, because the guys that like I meet, it's like they're scared. They think if they cuddle afterwards, that means I'm gonna fall in love with them. And, like now they have to run. It's like men are afraid of like that part and they think that it means something other than it is. But like you're right, it is very important. If you're having whether it's a casual sex or a hookup with somebody, afterwards kind of just like dine and dash bolt makes the person feel like, okay, did I not just experience the same thing that you did? Like, was there something else going on for you than what I thought was
Yeah.
happening?
Yeah, you
It's
ask for the bare
confusing.
minimum. You ask for the bare minimum of respect and they think you're asking for a relationship.
It totally, right? And like,
Yeah.
but I find it's like a lot of that fear that men have that, sensuality and the softer side of sex means love. But it's like you can have intimacy and connection without it having to mean that you're going to fall in love and get married.
I mean, when's the last time? I mean, I don't like to speak too much in generalities, but we do know that a lot more straight men struggle to have deep friendships than women,
Mhm.
right? Like men, a lot of men, not all men, obviously, not all men. I do want to say, like, this is not all men, and this is
Yeah.
also some women, but a lot of men really do struggle to create deep, intimate bonds for a whole bunch of reasons,
Mhm.
obviously. And so it's hard for them to understand that you can have an intimate moment without it meaning commitment.
Mhm.
right? We as women have these deep, intimate moments with each other all the time. And we understand that we're not trying to fuck each other or we're not asking for a long friendship. We've all gotten drunk and like been in the bathroom and like been like, oh my God, I love your lipstick. And she's like, oh my God, it's this shade. And then you bond for that moment and you feel connected and seen. And then you leave and you never talk to each other again,
Yeah,
right? Like that's like men don't necessarily have those kinds of interactions at the same level I think that women do. So it's a struggle for them. The other
absolutely.
thing I had another thought when you were bringing that up, which is also like, I think that everyone just wants to be seen,
Mhm.
but when it comes to hooking up, a lot of guys don't realize what they're looking for is to be seen, and they're not seeing the other person. They're not
Mhm.
actually like they're trying to get a certain need met that they don't understand is sometimes beyond the physical. And the way that they're being seen and the way that they're finding that intimacy is just through the physical. And when that's done, they're like, okay, I have been seen for this moment. I got what I wanted. Goodbye. And you're like, that's not okay. I don't know what to do with this now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. I don't know, I find and I hope that, like, the more information that is shared, the more people are talking about sex, the more people are talking about the healthy parameters, boundaries, respect, all of those things, that the men are listening a little bit, that, maybe they are diving in, maybe they are getting something from it and it's helping, eventually to change, the long term, I guess, what you get out of an experience and them being open and honest about what they're looking for out of an experience. Cause that's essentially what it is. You're sharing an experience with somebody, and both people need to feel like they got out of that experience what they needed out of it. Otherwise, it doesn't feel like it was fulfilling. And I think that's where a lot of times that casual sex can have an emotional impact on women. But I think casual sex can also be beautiful for people who are honest about it and still get what they need out of it, right?
Yeah, one of my clients said something recently, like in the past year, and I can't remember exactly how he said it, but it was something like, "Oh yeah, those women, they you start having sex with them and then they try and trap you into a relationship." And I was like, "I'm sorry. Let me change the narrative for you for a second, okay? When we have sex with people, we release a chemical called oxytocin. The different genders release different amounts overall, but that doesn't
Mhm.
necessarily, we don't take averages and apply them to an individual. So we can't actually measure on an individual level without testing how much oxytocin is being released during sex. But
Mhm.
either way, for both genders, it is being released. This is the chemical that makes you bond to someone. The more you have sex with someone, the more bonded to them you feel. And this is how people who were just a hookup end up falling into a relationship with each other when they know that this is not who they would actually choose to be in a relationship with. They're not trapping anyone. No one's trapping you because you have to consent to be in that relationship,
Mhm.
right? So you've both just decided that you feel bonded enough and you're too lazy to break up from the good sex and go find someone who's actually what you're looking for. That's not a trap. That's called being human, sometimes being lazy, sometimes being a slave to your chemicals. No one is trapping anybody. And it was just one of those things where I'm like, this goes back again to like, men want sex, women want relationships and love. And it's like, women want sex, men want relationships and love, right?
Yeah.
One of the first things I have to get my clients that I work with to admit, this happens like before I even start working with them. I'm like, what are you looking for? They're like, I don't know, whatever. And I'm like, what are you really looking for? They're like, I want love. Like almost every time they think that, like the young men who think they have to say like sex is about babies, they think that if they're saying anything other than I want sex, there's something wrong with them. And I think
Mhm.
that that's a real sign that we fucked up somewhere big in society if
Oh,
like
yeah.
adult men can't admit that they're looking to feel seen, feel heard, feel connected, and feel like they have someone that they can share the highs and lows of life with.
Totally. Absolutely. I agree with that because at the end of the day, every guy that I've ever talked to that, you know, can't commit, it's a fear of commitment because they're scared to be hurt too. So they go out with this macho, bravo, I'm going to take down all these women. And at the end of the day, they're just as lonely and they want to be loved and they want to be in a relationship, but they're scared to admit it and they're scared to get hurt. And it's just, it is that whole cycle as well. So they try to act a certain way because that's what they were taught men are supposed to act like. Right.
Hmm.
But it's just as damaging. It's just as damaging to the men and it's just as damaging to the women. So it would be nice if people could just speak up, be authentic, share what they want, and have open, honest conversations about it without feeling that, it makes them weird or they're going to be judged or that there's something wrong with them, you know?
Yeah, I would say a lot of people are worried about being rejected to a point where it creates a lot of you create a lot of problems when you let your fear of rejection guide your actions.
Oh, totally. But I also love how you broke down the science of, like, casual sex over a long period of time. I mean, I can't tell you how many men I have fallen in love with after a year or 2 years of casual sex with the same guy, and I'm not saying that the sex isn't amazing, but it is one of those things where I'm like, when I break down you as a person and me as a person and where you're at in life and where I'm at life, we don't work as a relationship, but I'm head over heels in love with you. And it's like I'm head over heels in love with you because we spend so much time connecting and bonding, through intimate, passionate, mind blowing sex. But in a relationship, like I see that you suck as a person to date, but like it's like you said, it's like you're addicted to
You
that and
fall
you
into a
create a bond.
relationship. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
right? And I don't think and then I think people confuse that, like, they're genuinely in love with this person and that this person is their whole world when the reality is it isn't. They weren't your world when it started, which is why you told yourself in the beginning, like, "Oh my god, we could never date. He's a mess. His life's a mess."
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, to circle back to being in the lifestyle, right? Like, you don't have to date everyone that you fall in love with. You don't have, you know what I mean? Like, that's
Yeah.
part of it. There's this there I monogamy culture teaches us that if you love someone, then that's it and you're done and this is it, and like true love conquers all and you'll fix your problems and all of those things.
Yeah.
And if you are involved in like the polyamory scene at all, you know that like love is great and feels good, but that doesn't mean you have to plan your whole future with this person.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
sex
you
is
can
great and feels
enjoy
good.
it.
Doesn't mean you have to plan your whole. Yeah, you can enjoy it. It doesn't need to be
Yeah.
like I have definitely fallen in love with some of my like sex partners in the past that I've been like, I love you. And that's it. That's the
Yeah.
end, right?
Yeah.
Like it's that, but I mean, it is a struggle to then block yourself off from. So if I love you, what does this mean for us in our future and where are we going to go with this? But like,
Totally.
there's that. I don't know. I would also put sometimes that category in the same, like the way that I love my best friends, but I also get to have sex with this person. Sometimes
Yeah.
that's what it feels like with these frequent hookups. And it does
Yeah.
feel different than the person that you want to share your life with.
Oh, 1000%. Yeah. A question for you. So, with the kink stuff, is there a specific kink that you find people ask about more than any of the other ones, or one that seems to be kind of dominating in the kink world?
Everyone wants to know about power dynamics.
Okay.
Um, So the power dynamic is okay. I'll give a this is how I define it. Obviously, other sex educators will explain this a little bit differently. But in my mind, kink, as I mentioned, is there's the sensations. How does it feel on your body? The
Mhm.
feeling of being restricted, the feeling of being choked, the feeling of being covered in food. The feeling of whatever it is, hot, cold, electricity, pain, pleasure. All of those are
Yeah.
feelings. The power dynamic is the I want to be controlled. I want to control. I want to feel humiliated. I want to humiliate, right? Like those are the power dynamics. So I find that while a lot of people will say, like, oh, I really want to be tied up, what they really mean is I want the feeling of being controlled. And the way that I know how to create that is through this sensation.
Okay.
Um, you can control someone without tying them up and still do bondage. So, for example, you order someone to stand with their hands crossed behind their back. And if they move, they're going to be punished, right? You get
Mhm.
a brat, they're going to move on purpose. You get someone who's behaving and following it, they're going to do their best to behave.
Mhm.
And then you have to find reasons to get them to move, like tickling them. And then you get to punish them, right? But like they're still confined by the dynamic. It's still a form of bondage. It's just not the sensation of bondage. So some people love the sensation of being tied up. So the number one thing that you get asked about is, I would say, like getting started with those power dynamics. How do we do it? How do we bring them in? How do I become more dominant? My partner wants me to be more dominant. How do I be more dominant? I've never had anyone say to me, how do I be more submissive?
Oh, okay. And is it typically then the women trying to get their partners to be more dominant?
There's a lot of women, I would say, given who I'm talking to and who I'm working with, yes. But I have also met women who are like, how do I be more dominant? I want to find that part of me.
Okay.
But I know a lot more women who are so tired of being in control of everything all the time, right? Like we have to do it all. We have to manage our households. We have to have jobs. We're in charge of our social calendar a lot of the time. Men
Mhm.
do not understand how when you let your wife be in charge of the social calendar, you're killing her sex drive. But aside from that, when you have to be in control of so many aspects of your life all the time, because if you're not, things don't get done. There is one place where you want to be able to turn off your brain, And if you are then in the bedroom and now you have to also decide how you're going to do all of this, what comes next? What's that? I know a lot more women who are like, I want one space where I get to turn off my brain. I want them to approach. I want them to approach me the way that I want to be approached. I want them to read my mind because I don't want to have to do any of it. How do I get him to
Mhm.
do this? I've had other women say, like, he's not romantic anymore. How do I bring that back? How do I get him to take initiative being romantic? So maybe when it comes to kink, a lot of it, now that I think about it, kink or no kink, really, it's just a lot of how do I get this person to take more initiative and more ownership over the sex we're having? And
Yeah, I could
sometimes that
see that.
manifests as how do I get them to be more dominant?
Yeah. I I do think, I mean, it's like, and I'm a very, I don't know, alpha female, I guess, if you will. So in the bedroom, I've always been the more dominant one. Um, I think part of what plays into my psyche too is because I do tend to date younger men. So there's that whole more experienced, let me lead you, let me, show you weird kind of dynamic that goes on. And then even when a younger guy tries to be more dominant, I think because I know I'm older than them, it fucks with my mind. And I'm like, well, this just feels weird because you're younger than me. And by being younger than me, by default, that means like you can't be the leader or in control. It's a weird thing that I go over in my mind. But at the end of the day, it's funny because I say to my friends, like, I just want a man to be the man. Like, I want a guy who can lead. I want the big burly, and I don't even mean like big burly like size wise, but I think I've created that in my mind because it's like I'm lacking that leadership in the bedroom from a guy, that it's like we create this like, oh, this big 6'4", you know, tough buff guy's going to come in, sweep me off my feet, pick me up, pin me against the wall, and I'm going to have this movie style sex fantasy play out because we lack that, and we're not getting it in the bedroom. But yet sometimes I find it's very hard to give up when you don't trust that they can be that person.
Well, that's it, right? You have to trust when it comes to kink, you have to trust the partner. You have to
Yeah.
trust your dom. And I don't know about you, but as a woman, I find it really hard to trust a lot of men and their
Yeah.
intentions. So it's one of those reasons is this woman has finally found a man that she trusts enough to be able to let go,
Mhm.
and then he's not stepping into that role that will allow her to let go.
Right.
And sometimes you hear people talk about this, and I like it's in a really weird, like, men want a woman to lead them. That's all they're looking for. They just want to. I'm like, it's absolutely not what it is.
Mhm.
Men, like, we're looking for someone we trust enough to allow us to stop doing and
Yeah.
thinking and worrying and planning, right? Because also, what kills your sex drive? Thinking, worrying, planning.
Yeah. Yeah,
We want to be in a
totally.
place of feeling. We need to trust that you're going to take us to this place of feeling. And we need to trust that you're not going to hurt us when we're there.
Yeah,
So
totally.
you end up in this relationship with this person who knows you as this like dominant alpha woman. And now you're flipping this. You know what I mean? It's really hard to find that person that you vibe with in that way. But I would say that sometimes it is about finding the right person,
Mhm.
and then you can sort of explore that side of yourself. Same with men. You need to find the right person. Men are told they have to be aggressive. You meet a lot of men who are like, I've always been the dom, but I'm finally getting to play with being the submissive person, and I really like it a lot. We're
Yeah.
all sort of just playing these roles that we've been assigned, and it's hard to find someone that you can trust enough to break from that.
Oh, that's so true, right? I mean, because the trust has to be there enough for you to even voice these things in the first place. And I think that the communication is like there's such a breakdown in relationships over communication over everything. And then, especially to try to have those conversations in the bedroom around sex, it just feels like you're just so exhausted from trying to communicate about the basics of, did you get this at the store, that you feel like, what's the point? He's not
Yeah.
listening. He never does, or she doesn't listen. It's always what she wants. So people just give up. And I personally think if they could figure it out, communicate in the bedroom, and figure that aspect out, funny enough, I think it would trickle over into all other aspects of like the relationship and their life that they create together, because they could do this. And then once they've been able to connect so intimately through conversation and honesty sexually, it just seems like everything else becomes a little bit easier.
Yeah. And honestly, that is one of the ways that I help people when they need it. I like I said, I do a lot of different kinds of work and I do sex education, but
Yeah.
like 90% of like coach, like a lot of coaching is just like, here's how you do it. Do what I say,
Yeah.
like but one, I'll give people like a tip. If you are struggling to express a desire because it's embarrassing,
Mhm.
um text them. Text it to them. Hey, I love you so much. I have this thing I really want to share with you. I'm really embarrassed to tell you about it. I'm going to text you, and then you are not to talk to me about it. You are just to text me back from the other room.
Okay.
Bye. Go to the other room. Text
Yeah.
them, right? I really want you to dominate me. That turns me on so much, right?
Yeah.
And then of course if you receive a text like that, you can ask, "Well, what do you mean by that?" One of the
Yeah.
other struggles for people is they want it but they don't know what they want. They don't know if they want to be tied up. They don't know if they just want someone to order them around the house for a little bit. They don't know if they just want someone to grab them by the hair and like force their dick down their throat. We don't
Yeah.
always know what we're asking for. Sometimes the request is, I don't know, but I want to take a workshop. I don't know, but I want to watch some porn. I don't
Yeah.
know, but I just want you to do XYZ. Spell out the fantasy, right? Your partner will not read your mind. And then they might be like, I'm not sure I can do this.
Mhm.
And that's when there's some learning to be done. There's always learning that can be done around this. And like, your partner's not going to get it right the first time if this is new, right? You don't want to plan a big, elaborate scene with many steps and many skills that need to be learned. You
Right.
start small, right? Sometimes people struggle with dirty talk, right? You can start by saying, next time we're having sex, I want you to, while we're having our regular vanilla missionary sex, I really want you to just tell me, like, paint a fantasy for me about how you would dominate me. I don't care if you pull it from porn. I don't care if you pull it from a romance novel. I just
Mhm.
want you to tell me a story while you're fucking me, right? Or text me a story when we're not fucking. Or next time we're having sex, I want you, and I'm blowing you, just grab me by the back of the head to start and be a bit more forceful, right?
Right.
One of the other struggles then is like, well, I don't want to tell him how to dominate me. I just want him to do it. Sorry, too bad. If he doesn't know how, you're going to have to tell him how you like it. And then he'll
Yeah.
figure it out eventually.
Yeah. Oh, it's so true, right? Like you can't have this list of things you want done to you but like you're not willing to share it and you're not willing to tell them how because I mean, your idea of spank me hard and his idea of she wants me to spank her hard could be very different things and you know, you spank her and then she's turning around being like, "What the fuck? Like that hurt. Nothing about that was fun."
Yeah, or sometimes you think, "Oh, she wants to be dominated, so that means she wants me to call her a slut." And she's like, "You will
Yeah.
respect me." Or like, "Oh, she wants me to call her a baby girl." And she's like, "We have a 3-year-old. Please don't."
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
you want to make sure that you're also there's so many different ways to dominate someone that
Yeah.
you want to find the way that's like your style and the way she wants to and see if you can
Yes.
blend those two together.
No, absolutely. I agree. I agree. I think that's perfect. So, are workshops like a good place for people to start? If like they're looking to kind of explore something, learn about something that they're into, do you find that there is a lot of resources and things like workshops out there that people can kind of dive in? It's like, hey, we've both agreed we want to try this. A workshop's a great way to get introduced to some of these things.
Not only are workshops a fantastic way to get introduced to it, you end up finding another educator that you can then work with on a one-on-one capacity if you want to, or you're introduced to other people in the lifestyle who might know more or less than you. A lot
Okay.
of times virtual workshops are great to connect with educators you might want to learn from.
Mm-hmm.
In-person experiences like conventions, like Montreal Fetish Weekend used to have some educational workshops. I know that in Edmonton there's like a hotel takeover company that I can't remember the name of, but
Yeah.
they'll do like kinky play parties and they'll also have education. So you're meeting other people who are interested, other people in the community who might be able to give you some advice or tips, other people who in the playroom might be willing to let you play. Um, so yeah, if you're taking a workshop on, I'll say the Shibari example, you're going to
Mm-hmm.
learn all the basics and all the safety. Now you can go and play safely at home. Great. If you are taking a workshop that's like an intro to everything, then you're going to be connected with resources. You're going to
Right.
be networking. And if you end up ever, if anyone is ever in Toronto and visits Oasis Aqualounge, they have fetish nights. And every time I've gone, there's people in the dungeon who are happy to play with you. If you're like, oh, hey, I really want to try being tied up, they'll be like, yeah, they're not going to assume you mean sex. They're going to assume you mean I want to be tied up.
Right.
And you can have a conversation. People are happy to be like, yeah, this is my flogger. Do you want to try it? Do you have a partner you want to try it on? There's always
Mm-hmm.
someone in the dungeon, as long as they're not in the middle of a scene, who is happy to do a bit of teaching.
Okay.
I don't know why. There's a lot of people who are like, don't walk in and assume that people want to teach a baby. I'm like, I don't know. There's always been someone in that room who's happy to have that conversation. You might
Yeah.
not be sexually attracted to them, but that doesn't mean you can't learn something useful from them
Totally.
and be
Yeah. It's
nice
so
and
true.
friendly. Yeah.
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 No, it's so true. Well, honestly, Ray, this has been like a fascinating conversation in so many ways. I feel like I always learn so much. And like, I appreciate that you were able to come on here and have this conversation. For people who want to be able to reach out, connect with you on social media, see what workshops you have, everything, where can they find you?
I'll give all of my socials. So my website is Share with Rae. Not it's a pun on my last name, but it's spelled the normal way. So SHAREWITH
Mhm.
Ray.com. That's my website. My Instagram that has a lot of the dating coaching and coaching tips is at Share with Rae. And then I have another Instagram that's like more thirst trap sexy photos and also sex ed. And I advertise my workshops a lot more there. And that one is Wife Bay Ray,
Okay.
WIFEBAERAE. So it really depends on like separate accounts for separate information. Not everyone
Mhm.
wants the same thing. So I would say pick whichever one of those accounts, follow both of them, and then unfollow whichever one doesn't speak to you. And also I'm on TikTok as Wife Bay Ray, but I would say Instagram has more content because of TikTok censorship. So
Okay.
fuck TikTok at this
Oh, I
point.
know, right? I don't even bother because 'cause I'm like, I just can't. Yeah.
I'm so tired of TikTok. Like it was so fun over the pandemic, and they've sucked the joy out of it for me.
Oh, yeah. I know everything is
Mhm.
censored, right? You can't even spell the word sex, nothing, like, it's crazy. So, yeah, I just
It's
was like, "Nope."
yeah, it's
But
exhausting.
awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We'll definitely make sure we share all of those socials in the show notes as well for everybody so you guys can reach out. Is there anything else before we part ways that you would like to share with anybody who's thinking about sex education, kink education, workshops, anything?
Not off the top of my head, but feel free to reach out if you have any questions, and I'm happy to have a conversation at any time.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much. And you guys, thanks for listening. Hope you guys learned something and definitely connect with Rae on Instagram and see everything she's got out there.